What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Wednesday, so I'm going to go with my favorite trade targets for this week. And we're starting off with tight end this week. Almost never start off with tight end, just given how much of a wasteland that position is. But it's going to be really valuable come the fantasy playoffs if we can actually get a half-decent tight end on our teams. I think the top two trade targets this week at the position are Trey McBride and Jake Ferguson. McBride leads all tight ends in expected fantasy points on the season, but he only has 8.4 half PPR points per game since he hasn't scored yet, and he hasn't really broken off any long plays either. He's had a few bigger gains, but he's a player that's highly athletic that we expect to multiple times this season rip off very, very large plays, especially given the offense, given who's playing around him, where defenses can't focus on him as much. So kind of hitting the low end of his range of outcomes right now. Has a monster 24.4% target share through 3 weeks. That's something we dream of at the tight end position. And again, no tight end has more expected fantasy points in the season. Expected fantasy points, for those of you who don't know, is just volume. It's just how much usage you're getting. Typically, when we see a player with a lot of expected fantasy points, means a lot of targets, a lot of carries, things like that are going in their direction. And so if they haven't hit yet, it's things like getting unlucky with touchdowns, getting unlucky with breaking long plays. Now, at times, a player can have a lot of expected fantasy points, but they're bad or their quarterback is bad. And so you can look at it and say, okay, they're getting unlucky, but they're just on a bad offense or they're not a good player. But we know Kyler's a good quarterback. We know McBride is a very good tight end. So that's not the reason he's getting unlucky. It's actual unluckiness for why he's not scoring a lot. He was in the concussion protocol. Check that out. There is actually a chance he's not going to play this week, which would be unfortunate, but could also present you with an opportunity. If he does end up being out this week, maybe we find that out later in the week, and you can go to the person that has him and be like, listen, you're struggling right now. You're not going to have him this week. Maybe they'll accept a much lower deal than they should because it's not going to be a long-term thing. At most, it's very likely he would miss one game, and he might, again, still even play this week. But again, if he does not play this week, you might be able to go in there with the low ball offer. And if you can pull that off, that's really going to benefit you long-term. Again, he's my tight end one this season, even if I knew he was going to miss this week. Then we have Jake Ferguson. McBride might be leading in total expected fantasy points, but because Ferguson missed a week, he's actually the leader in expected points per game. So he's had very, very strong volume. He's basically the wide receiver 2 on one of the highest volume passing offenses in the league. A team that, like we saw this last week, when they get down, they're going to go very pass heavy. They're going to put up some really big numbers, not necessarily win the game, but they're going to pull off some sort of comeback. And he has a monster red zone role. So he's coming off a pretty decent game. So it's not like people are just giving Jake Ferguson away. But if you have some solid running backs, wide receivers on your bench, hopefully the team that has him is weak at one of those positions. You could potentially swap tight ends while giving them a nice upgrade at the spot they're weakest at. People ask me all the time to include example trades in these videos, but that's just truly just not how trading works in fantasy. You are far more likely to actually get a deal done with a team when you're offering a player at a position that they are weak at. So the best thing you can do isn't watch a video, see 2 players, and see if there's 2 teams that match up there. Best thing you can do is go to the rosters in your league, figure out what you are strong at, and then search for a team in your league that is weak at that position. Then comb through their team, see if they do have a player you want to be trading for, and then, of course, offer them the position that they are weak at. Me telling you that I have Tony Pollard ranked just behind Ferguson rest of the season, that's not super helpful because for a lot of you, that might be a great one-for-one trade, especially if you have pretty decent running backs ahead of Pollard and you're kind of weak at tight end. But for others of you, that would be a terrible trade. Maybe you're weaker at running back. Maybe you have a half-decent tight end. Maybe the team you're trading for already has good running backs. They'll never accept that. But what if the team you're trading for, Ferguson, with they have terrible running backs? There's just so much variance here that it's not good to just look at players. Look at the team. What are they weak at? Can you fill that role? And if you can, you're way more likely to actually get a deal done. Moving on to running back. Number 1 buy low, I think, is Najee Harris, roughly like a mid to low end running back to rest of the season, but he's 18th in expected fantasy points, 31st in actual fantasy points. He's remained inefficient this season, but Arthur Smith does not care at all about efficiency. He would much rather you gain 3 yards, but you ran someone over, opposed to gaining 4.5 yards, but being boring and like outrunning someone. Like, he just wants that style of football where Najee is running people over. And so that's obviously a benefit for Najee in fantasy because he's going to get a lot of touches. So as long as he stays healthy, he's going to lead this backfield. He's obviously going to score at some point, so the numbers are going to increase. He doesn't have a massive ceiling because the offense isn't very good. They have no real receiving volume, and so you can't really add that on. But he's a pretty strong play at running back too. And that's still a really valuable spot on your team to have. Like, to have someone where every week you can just kind of throw them into the running back 2 spot, know that they're not going to go off for like 30 fantasy points, but know that, they have a decent chance of scoring. If we haven't seen it so far this season, like a relatively decent chance of scoring, going to get a decent amount of touches. And it kind of seems like right now Warren's dealing with some things. He can't stay fully healthy. And so especially if Warren misses any time, Najee's going to be in for a massive workload. They did have that report where he was in like a sling after the game. It doesn't seem like it's anything. There was no footage in the game that indicated that he suffered a big injury. I checked the practice reports on, when this goes up on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday, and see, but my guess is we're much more worried about Warren's, workload this week than we would be about Najee Harris. I think he's going to be fine, but again, confirm that. Another running back, one that I would sell right now is Rachaad White. I doubt many of you drafted him because I was off him all summer, but for those of you who did, exactly what we talked about is happening at honestly a faster rate than I anticipated. Bucky Irving is simply a better pure runner, and he's a much better fit for this offense. He's taking a much larger workload to start the season than anticipated. He's also getting a way bigger workload than their scrub backups did last season. White was not good last year. He was good in fantasy, but he wasn't good in the NFL. He just got 1 million touches. And so what we talked about all summer was if you take those touches away because your backup is actually good now and they actually want to use them, he's just going to be an inefficient running back splitting a workload on a below average rushing offense and a very below average rushing offense at that. Now, in full PPR leagues, he's still going to have value because he's going to catch a lot of dump offs. But honestly, in those formats, I would still be looking to sell him because people know that he has more value in that format. And I just still don't think people fully realize the potential here for Bucky Irving to take 65% of this early down workload. And you're like, okay, but I don't care about the rushing volume, but he's still on the field more. That's the thing. It's like, yes, I understand that if you removed 3-4 carries a game from White, you don't really care that much, right? Because that's probably only like a point and a half. It's not going to hurt him that much. It's more that if we actually get Bucky Irving on the field a lot more in early downs, some of those plays were still turning into targets for Rachaad White. So even if it's only the early down we're taking away, you're still reducing the time he's on the field and thus reducing his target share. So you're still going to get hit in both areas. Right now, I still have White as the running back 23 rest of the season, but if we keep seeing an accelerated snap share increase for Bucky Irving, and he comes out there and he's now, getting more work than Rachaad White on the ground, I could see rest of season White dropping into like the late 20s running back. So if you can get some level of running back 2 value, some level of flex value for Rachaad White, I definitely be fine with that. I see a very bad outcome for Rachaad White this season. Wide receiver. I think the top trade target is Jameson Williams, coming off a down game, but he's still 5th on the entire season among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points, only 20th in actual fantasy points. To me, he's the ultimate flex play. I don't think I'd trust him every week as a wide receiver 2. I'd probably want a better wide receiver 2 in my roster, but I would love every week throwing him into the flex spot because the flex spot's one where you understand that the player, doesn't have a very high floor, can go out there and do what, JMO did last week and have 1 reception for 9 yards, but understanding that you're also generating a ceiling where every time he touches the football, he can score a long touchdown. And that's going to open up games where he has 5 for 100 in a score. He has a receiving and a rushing touchdown, and just being on this offense is going to open up so many long play and touchdown opportunities. And I think if you ever have a chance to buy low on a Lions player, you should probably just do it. That's like a blanket statement for all of Gibbs, Montgomery, Laporta, St. Brown, and Jameson Williams. For all of them, if we ever run into a stretch of a few games where they're not scoring a ton of fantasy points, you probably just want to buy low. Like, I understand, we talk about this every week, they can't all go off. And so every single week, 1 or 2 of them is not going to have that great of game because they're not going to score 50 and everyone gets a touchdown. But the production is going to flip-flop between players this season, and all of them have a very high ceiling. All of them, especially if there's an injury ever, which we now have with Laporta, they're all going to increase a lot in value when that happens. Now, the Laporta injury, honestly, I think he could play this week. Check practice reports throughout the week, but you never know with ankles. So if it ends up where it's worse than they think, he misses a game or 2, that obviously is going to, bake in some equity in Jameson Williams. But again, I think if you have an opportunity to combine, maybe you drafted really well for your bench, a lot of depth there. Maybe you hit on some bench players that are now in your starting lineup. If you can package like 2 pretty strong bench players and turn them into Jameson Williams, I'd 100% do that. Again, targeting a team where they have a weakness where you have a strength. If you've got pretty decent running backs on your bench and the JMO team out there is really struggling at running back 2, that's an opportunity for you to package a running back and receiver, send them over there, get a nice flex upgrade in doing that. Behind JMO, I think I'd go with Tank Dell. Dell has been super disappointing this season, but he's seeing better volume than you would think. He's 28th in expected fantasy points per game, 61st in actual. Better game in week 3, caught 5 of 6 targets, 62 yards. He just hasn't really broken off a big play yet. He has one 20-yard play, but it was 23 yards. I'm talking like, he's capable of 30, 40-yard plays. Hasn't scored yet. Did have that one play in week 2 where it could have gone for like a 60-yard touchdown. Goes right off his hands. Obviously, his numbers look better if that happens. He was just hitting last year. He had 7 touchdowns in 11 games as a rookie. He had 10 plays of 20-plus yards, basically 1 a game, only having 1 in 3 games this season. It's going to happen. The touchdown's going to come. The big plays are going to come. He also had a 63% catch rate last season, down to 53%. We know it's not going to stay at 53% this year. Again, it's only week 3. For so many players, we are dealing with a very, very small sample size. He's not bad, right? His separation score is still strong. He's not running like barely any routes. He has fewer routes run than Nico and Diggs, but it's barely. He's within like 10 routes of those two. So still running routes, still separating, just hasn't hit yet. My wide receiver 24 right now, rest of season. If you can get him any cheaper than wide receiver 2 value, like I wouldn't pay wide receiver 2 because if he's wide receiver 24, you're basically just getting a flip-flop in value. But if you can get him for flex value, another one where if you can get him for 2 bench spots, again, trying to target teams that have a weakness where you have a strength. If you're able to do that, 2 players for 1 for either JMO or Tank Dell, I think that's probably the move this week. On to quarterback, where I don't know, again, quarterback is always a spot where it's so difficult to actually buy low because no one ever wants to actually do quarterback trades. I think we got to talk about 2 players. Anthony Richardson and Patrick Mahomes, who honestly could be trade targets because I know some people are absolutely willing to sell low on both of these players. Now, as we'll go over, I wouldn't pay a lot, right? I'm not giving up like Josh Allen for these quarterbacks, right? And I'm not giving up like a wide receiver 1 or anything. Like, understand that if you're buying low, actually buy low and see what the lowest is people will give up. But I've had a lot of questions this week asking if I'm concerned at all for these 2 quarterbacks, if people should be making a move on them. And my response is like, sort of. Like, yes, I am concerned with how poorly these 2 have played at times, but that's the case with 95% of quarterbacks this season, excluding Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow now that Higgins is back and it looks like the offense can be better as a result. what quarterbacks have you felt like 100% confident in? Maybe Sam Darnold, until you consider he has 35 total rushing yards. He has a 10.3% touchdown rate, which is nearly triple his career average, would be the single best season in the history of the NFL. So obviously that's going to regress down. Maybe Kyler, but realistically, he's only had one good start. He had 16 points or less in the other two. Dak has had less than 15 in 2 of 3. Hurts has looked lost at times. I would probably throw Jalen Hurts into the group where I'm not super concerned with it, but he's looked lost at times this season as well. Carr completely fell apart last week. Purdy never has a ceiling. Geno hasn't hit 19 fantasy points yet. And then you get to Mahomes and AR. Like I was running through the fantasy production of quarterbacks this season. Then you get to the two we're worried about. So yes, I am a little bit concerned with these two, but there are about 6 quarterbacks this season right now that I am not concerned with. Even given their play so far this season, rest of the season, I still have Mahomes quarterback 6, AR as a quarterback 8. So that's kind of where I'm viewing them right now. That could definitely drop if they both have another poor game this week. But I do think we need to give both of them a little bit more time. The running back scored all 3 touchdowns in Indy last week. That's not going to happen at a super high rate. Had he scored 1 or 2 of these touchdowns, his day would look a lot different. Plus, I really do believe that Josh Downs being back, being healthy, getting back to 100%, wasn't 100% last week, but going to be 100% in like a week or two. I think that's going to help the offense. That's going to help them sustain more drives, which will obviously help. And it'll help really the plays. I mean, they are dead last in the NFL with 50 plays per game this season. The lowest season-long total over the past decade in plays per game was the 2018 Miami Dolphins, who had 54.9. So unless the Colts this season are going to have the lowest play volume over the last decade of any team, despite having a head coach that wants to play fast, unless that's going to happen, I'm thinking a big uptick in plays is coming. Of course, more plays equals more fantasy production. Again, yes, the accuracy is a concern with AR, but I do feel that it's a little bit overblown because there are a lot of quarterbacks that have a way higher completion rate, but their completions are literally going 5 to 7 yards downfield. AR's completion rate's a lot lower because he's chucking the ball 50 yards downfield. Now, does he need to stop doing that at the rate that he is? Probably. But again, I think Downs coming back will help with that. That's another player that's going to be very good at getting open short, and that's going to help them sustain drives, help this offense stay on the field, which will increase plays, increase scoring volume. Then with Mahomes, I do think the loss of Marquise Brown really, really hurts them. Initially, we're going to get him all season. Then he gets hurt. And it's like, okay, maybe only 4 weeks. Now it's looking like probably the whole season Marquise Brown is going to miss. That really, really hurts Mahomes. But I do also think Worthy is going to develop a little bit quicker than Rashee Rice did as a rookie. Once he gets going a little bit more, once they can trust him more for higher target share, I do think things are going to improve for Patrick Mahomes. He's also getting a little bit unlucky right now. By far the highest interception rate of his career so far. Again, it's a 3-week sample. I'm sure you could find a 3-week sample in his career where things have looked much worse. A little bit fluky there. Also, if we consider he's got the highest completion rate of his career. So in the same season right now where he has the highest completion rate of his career, he has the highest interception rate. Those two things are going to balance out. He's not going to throw picks at this high of rate. Again, I see legitimate concerns. The ceiling on Mahomes is not as high as we thought it was entering the season, given this Marquise Brown injury. And then for Richardson, the floor is certainly lower, but I think he's been hitting a little bit more of that floor outcome because of the touchdowns and just because of the lack of play volume. You give the Colts 10 more plays per game, you have him score the touchdowns instead of 3 running backs, you're going to get a lot more fantasy production. But again, going back to like the original question that people are asking, are we concerned? We're concerned, but there are only 6 quarterbacks in the NFL right now that I'm not concerned with their fantasy production. Lamar, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, and Jalen Hurts. That is it. I have some level of concern with every single other quarterback. So unless, this is probably the biggest point here, unless you think you can get a deal done for one of those 6 in a trade, you're best just holding off, giving these two another week or two, going from there. if we get, into week 5, into week 6, and this lack of production is still happening, then we can start to consider streaming other quarterbacks, making a move for someone else. I've told some people, if you have the depth, you have some bench players where you're like, listen, they're a good player, but I don't really see them ever cracking my starting lineup. Add Sam Darnold, add Geno Smith, add one of these quarterbacks that is playing really well right now and is in a great situation, and stash them. Still give Mahomes and Anthony Richardson a little bit more time, but stash that other quarterback in case we do need to move to them going forward. At the end of the day, I'd still rather be patient with these two because we know that they possess a significantly higher ceiling than these streaming options. And let's be honest, the floor, even though we haven't seen it for the past couple of weeks, the floor is exactly the same. The floor of Richardson and Mahomes is the exact same as all these streaming options, but their ceiling is significantly higher. That's why, again, give them more time. I'd still rather be going with them. So that's how I think the trade market is looking this week. I have a larger list on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And if you have questions you want to be asking, you want to be posing trade questions to players, have people vote on them, we have the free Discord channel as well. You can find a link to that in my website as well. I'll be back tomorrow to break down all the start-sit decisions for week 4. But that'll do it for this one. Please leave a like if you watched this far. Please subscribe if you are new here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.